There's a couple who really consistent in church and always showing up at church. And just one Sunday morning, the wife got up early and was downstairs, kind of doing some stuff and just reading the Bible, that sort of stuff. And got later and later, and her husband wasn't up, and she was wondering, he really needs to get up and start moving. And so she kind of got up and she went upstairs and said, "Honey, church is getting close. You really got to get up and get ready and get to church." And the husband was like, "You know what? I've kind of had it. I don't really want to go anymore. I don't really enjoy it. I don't like that church very much." And she said, "But we go every week." He says, "Yeah, I know, but I don't think the people there like me, and I don't really like them. And you know what? I just don't think I'm going to go today." And she said, "But honey, you're the pastor. You really have to go, right?" It begs the question sometimes, why are we here? You know why I'm here. It's in my job description, right? I'm here, and we know that, but I'm wondering, why are you here today? What are you hoping for? As you come to worship, as you come, this first Sunday of Advent, and we kind of dive into this season, one of my favorite seasons of the year. Why are you here? When you got up this morning, did you think, okay, I'm going to go to church today because, or maybe sometimes it's just what we do, right? It's just what we do. It's just a regular part of what we do, and so we do it without thinking about it. We just get up and we move on, and we get there, and maybe you have very low expectations about what's going to happen today. You're here because it's what you do. And sometimes actually that's not a bad thing, to do what you're supposed to do when it's time to do it. Sometimes we have to step into what's needed. But we can sometimes come with low expectations and a sense that, we're just going to go, and then after that we'll go on to the next thing. But if someone were to ask you, if you were to ask each other, why are you here today? Why did you come? What are you expecting to have happen? What are you expecting to see today? What are you expecting to hear? What are you expecting God to do? It's important sometimes to understand our own expectations, isn't it? And even to think about what motivates us. What are we looking for? What are we hoping for when we come into a church community? What are we hoping for when we come to worship? And as we look at this word hope today, and that's the word for this Sunday in Advent, we think, what are we hoping for? What are we waiting for? What are we hoping will happen? And there's some really interesting stories in the New Testament where Jesus asks some questions of people that the answer seems pretty obvious. One of the stories that we want to look at this morning is the story of Bartimaeus, and he was a blind man. And the text says that when Jesus was coming along the way, he was shouting out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he's sitting there, and people say, hey, just be quiet, don't cause a ruckus. But then Jesus says, "No, come over." And so he gets up and he comes, blind as he is, and Jesus asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" It seems like an obvious answer. It doesn't seem like there would need to be the question. But Jesus asks it anyway. And I want to take us to that text in Mark chapter 10, and we'll just look at that this morning as we get started. Beginning in verse 46. The text says, and they came to Jericho, and he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd. Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside, and when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." And it says, and throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. And the idea that we're going to look at today is this, that the mystery and the beauty of God with us, right? Emmanuel, God with us, is that he comes into our lives to redeem and to restore. And we recognize that restoration, redemption are rooted deep in the heart of God. God desires to restore and to redeem. God desires to bring things that are broken back to a place of repair. He wants to redeem us from the places of bondage in which we find ourselves. And we see this from the very beginning of history. We see God restoring and redeeming right from the very start of the Old Testament. It says that in Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. There are interesting theories about why the earth was formless and void and what happened, and lots of theories about the beginning of time and how things were. But what we see here is that the earth is there, like it's there, it's formless and it's void, but it's there. And the two words that we see there, tohu and bohu, can be translated in various ways. Certainly one of the most common, and we see here, is it was without form and it was void. Other ways those words can be translated are confused and empty, or in disarray and empty. But darkness was over the face of the deep. When we start the story, when we get to in the beginning, it was all in disarray and it was empty. There's no purpose. It's there. It's just existing. But it's in disarray and it's empty. And it says that God did something about that. He changed that situation. And God said, "Let there be light." And the heavens and waters and vegetation and plants yielding seed, and let there be fruit trees bearing fruit, and let there be lights in the heavens and signs for the seasons. Let there be water creatures and sky creatures of every sort, and livestock and all sorts of things that creep along the ground, and let's make man in our own image. God does something in this moment, right, of disarray and emptiness. Let's fill this disarray and emptiness. Let's redeem and restore this disarray and emptiness. And when he finished that work, he said, "This is really good. This is very good." Right? God steps into this moment and takes what is in disarray and what is empty, what is formless and void, and he restores it as he speaks into existence the beauty of the earth around us. I love this image of the earth from space. I just can't ever get over it. You know, as I was thinking about this week and I pulled up this image, the creativity and the beauty of what we have all around us comes from what was at one time in disarray and empty. Have you thought of the creation of the world before as God's maybe first act of restoration and redemption? He takes something that's there that there isn't much purpose to, there's not much form, there's a lot of emptiness, and he restores. He brings from disarray and emptiness beauty and goodness and light and creatures. This is what God does. It's rooted in the very nature of God to take what's broken, what's in disarray, what's empty, and reform it into something that's good and beautiful. And God says, it's really good. It's very good what's happened here. So we see that rooted deep in God's heart is a desire to redeem things and to restore things. The story goes on from there, and we understand that when God creates mankind, he puts them in the garden and says, you can do whatever you want, but don't eat from this tree. But they decide to do that, right? The serpent offers the fruit, and they ate it because they thought it would make them like God. But as soon as they do, their innocence is gone, and they went from being naked and unashamed to hiding and ashamed. This is what happens, right? God creates this beautiful thing. He redeems and restores the earth and makes it beautiful, and it says it's very good. And then not long after that, man enters the picture and decides to take it his own direction. And again, corruption enters and brokenness enters. And when God comes looking for them and in the garden, he says, well, where are you? They were hiding. They were hiding because they were ashamed. The sin and chaos suddenly enters back in. Disarray and emptiness from a relationship with the living God changed into running from him and covering themselves with leaves. The story begins with this beautiful relationship of God with the people that he loves, and his walking with them in the garden and talking with them and having fellowship with them. And it goes from there to brokenness and disarray, sin and chaos, and now they're hiding and they're running away. And one of the interesting things that happens here is it says that they made coverings for themselves from fig leaves, and so that they could hide their nakedness, because they were ashamed now. One of the things we don't often think about in the story as it begins to unfold in Genesis chapter 3:21 is that God makes for them coverings of skin, right? One of the interesting parts of the story that we sometimes miss is that God meets them in their brokenness. Where are you? And they come out. We were hiding because we were naked and we were ashamed. And who told you you were naked? Why are you? How did you get here? And God moves through that with them, and ultimately, because he had said that if you eat of this tree, you'll surely die. He has to separate them from himself, which is what death is in this moment, a separation of relationship with God. But it wasn't without some offering. It wasn't without a redeeming part of the story. And it says in Genesis 3:21, and the Lord God made for Adam and for his wife garments of skin and clothed them. This is the first sacrifice made. The first animal sacrifice is made to provide covering for Adam and Eve. And as the story unfolds in history, sin and the very corruption of nature are unleashed, and more brokenness follows. They move out of this place of shalom, right? That word shalom is all things are as they should be. That's what peace means here. Shalom. It's things are as they were intended to be. They move out of that place of shalom. They move out of the place of orderliness and goodness and into brokenness and corruption. And they became so awful that in just a few short generations, God said, I'm sorry I ever started this mess. I think it's a fascinating thing that we find that God regrets. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, right? It says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's a pretty strong statement. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. And so the story goes that God brings a flood of destruction but preserves man through it. And on the story goes. And it still goes on today. There's goodness, and then it's broken, and then disarray and emptiness and corruption comes in. And then God steps back in and he meets them again, and they step out and he steps back in and he meets them again. Because deeply rooted in the heart of God is a desire to redeem and restore, to fix that which is broken, to reverse that which has been torn apart. And so we see that story coming back and back around all the way through Scripture. God redeems and restores, and then disarray and emptiness comes into our lives. Sometimes because of choices we make, and sometimes because of choices others make that had nothing to do with us, and sometimes just out of the fact that we live in a world that's broken and it's degrading and things are falling apart. But the disarray and the emptiness come. And then God steps in again and he restores, and then it comes. In the history of Israel, it comes to the place that God says, look, I'm going to make a new day. A day's coming when I'm going to restore all things, when I'm going to bring this Messiah to be, and he will come and he will bring back those things that are broken. A new day is going to come when things will turn around, when life will be redeemed and restored, and we will find this prominently in Isaiah, right? And these passages that we read often at Advent time, in Isaiah chapter 7 and Isaiah chapter 9. First one is Isaiah 7:14. It says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. That's what Advent is about, right? It's the waiting for God who's coming to be with us. And so we have this picture in Isaiah. There's going to be a day coming when I'm going to restore. The virgin will conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. And then we go on to Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. You remember this text. This is the text that so often we read at Advent time. There's a day coming when no more gloom will be there, no more anguish. He goes on, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light is shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. Isaiah prophesies the coming of the Messiah. He says things are going to change. There's going to be a new day. Isaiah goes on, for to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. And so as we come to Advent, this time when we remember it's about his coming, the coming of the Messiah, the story of Advent, the coming of the Messiah who was promised long ago, who would come to reverse the brokenness and the curse, who would begin to restore once again the disarray and emptiness that has come into the world. And when we think about this disarray and emptiness, this brokenness that happens, we recognize it's not just happening in the world out there somewhere, it's also happening at times in our own lives. We have some of it ourselves. And some of the brokenness that we have and some of the disarray that we have and some of the emptiness that's in our lives is because of our own choosing, and some of it is because of the choosing of other people, and some of it is just that we live in this world where brokenness and corruption sometimes spill onto us through no fault of our own or anyone else. But the sign of the Messiah is the reversal of the curse and brokenness of sin. And when John the Baptist has been out there, he's preaching, this is the one, right? This is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is the one I've been telling you about. But then John finds himself in prison and he begins to doubt and he wonders, is this the Messiah or did I miss it? Is this the one or did I miss it? Is there someone else coming? And John can see the handwriting on the wall, right? His death is coming. He's in prison. He's not going to last much longer. And so he sends one of his disciples to Jesus to ask him the question, are you the one or is there going to be someone else? And Jesus answers the disciple this way. And he answered them, go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up. The poor have good news preached to them. What's Jesus saying to John? No, you didn't miss it. I am the one. And this is what's going to happen. This is what was foretold long ago by the prophets, and this is what's happening in front of your eyes right now. There's this reversal of the brokenness of the world. And what Jesus wants John to know is that he has gotten it right, that Jesus is the Messiah. That God is coming in the Messiah to reverse, to redeem, to restore the brokenness. That's deeply rooted in the heart of God to restore and to redeem. And Jesus wants to say to John, no, I've come into the world to redeem and to restore. Jesus is affirming himself as the Messiah, coming to heal, to redeem, to restore. But it's interesting that, again, as he goes along the way, and he encounters people who are broken in various ways, he asks them interesting questions, like the one that we read at the beginning. What do you want me to do for you? Even when it seems like an obvious thing. What do you want me to do for you? And while these maybe at first seem to be rhetorical questions, I think we should recognize that Jesus is asking real questions. When Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? It's not a rhetorical question, it's a real question. What do you want? Because we don't get what we don't ask for, but we also don't know what to ask for until we think about it. So, what do you want? Redemption and restoration begin with an understanding of what's broken. You have to know what's wrong. You have to know what you want restored really before you can move into restoration. And so the question that Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you, isn't the only question he asks. He asks a lot of interesting questions as he journeys through Jerusalem and the surrounding countryside. In Bartimaeus' case, here in Mark chapter 10, he says, what do you want me to do for you? It seems obvious. He's blind. What else could he want? What else would he want? And yet Jesus asked the question. To the woman in the crowd who came up, who's been suffering from this bleeding issue for many, many years, she touched his cloak and he feels his power go out from him and he says, who touched me? It's an interesting question. The disciples are like, what? Like, are you crazy? Everyone's touching you. Why does he ask this question? He asks questions throughout the Gospels like, why are you anxious and why are you afraid? And you remember in John chapter 5, the story of the man who has been lame and unable to walk for his whole life. And Jesus comes into the pool and into this area. And he looks at this man and he says, do you want to be healed? It just seems like a crazy question. Do you want to be healed? Isn't it obvious what these people want? Why is Jesus asking these questions? And it's likely the case that Jesus asked these questions first because he wants us to hear what the answer is. He wants us to articulate what it is we're looking for. He wants them to articulate what it is that he's looking for. Because there are times when we're in situations that are broken and where there's emptiness and there's disarray. And to be honest, we're happy in that squalor. We don't mind staying there. And so Jesus comes into this relationship with this man at the pool, and he says, do you want to be healed? Because it's a serious question. If you want to stay here, if you want to live in this place, then that's your choice. But do you want to be healed? Not everyone who's in a negative situation wants out. Last winter, as it was really starting to get cold, I was here one Wednesday morning after our men's discipleship group, and and a guy walked in off the street, and I didn't know who he was, but he appeared to be homeless because he was carrying everything that he owned or looked like on his back, and he came in, and I just made it a point that morning. I thought, you know what, I am just going to spend some time with this guy and just talk to him. I'm just, sometimes it's like there's a lot of busyness, and you know how that is. When somebody comes along and they want something, you just try to figure out how to get out of it, right? But I decided this morning I was going to listen. I was going to have a conversation with this guy who was homeless, and that was the first morning last fall when it was really cold. It was below freezing, and he came in, and I started to just ask him questions like what do you need? So, well, I would I would love to have some food. Maybe I could just sit in here for a little while, have a cup of coffee, and warm up. And I said, that's fine. We're happy to help you. You're welcome to stick around. And I started to get into his story a little bit. Like, where do you live? Where are you staying? He's like, well, I just kind of sleep behind these bushes. It's pretty warm, and then I can hide my stuff, and I stay there. And I started to learn more about his story. He was from Southern California, and he came up here. I was like, why would you do that? Like, you're in Southern California, man. If you're going to live outside, live somewhere where it's warm. It's like, I didn't really like Southern California, so I came down here, and all right, here you are. And I said, but what? I said, there's a lot of work around here. Would you like to have a job? And I was a little bit shocked when he said, not really. He did. I said, what would you think if we helped you to get a job? He said, yeah, I've done that. I'm not that excited about working. I don't say that to be critical. I just say that was his answer to the question. Like, he liked his situation. He was happy in his place. And so, we continued to talk. It was a very pleasant conversation. I gave him a little bit of food, and we gave him some help, and he went on his way, and I haven't seen him since then. But sometimes people want to stay where they are. And so Jesus is asking a serious question. What do you want me to do for you? The relationship we have with Jesus is interactive. It's a relationship of love in which he doesn't take over our lives without an invitation, like an invitation from us to join us in our life. There's no question that Jesus came to give us the best life available, and he's willing to bring us into it. But his desire is for us to be involved and then to help and to step up and take some action in our own lives. To the man at the pool, do you really want help? Do you want to be healed? Or are you just looking for someone to commiserate? Do you want to be healed really, or are you happy in your disarray and darkness? And so that's a question for us. What do we want from Jesus? What are we asking him to do? What do you want him to do for you? What do you want from God? What would your answer be if Jesus asked you, what would you like me to do for you? Because Jesus is asking us that same question as he comes to us. What would you like me to do for you? What are you looking to see changed in your life? Christ is alive, and he's asking this question. How do you want me to come to you? What do you want to ask of me? And so that's a question I just want to invite us to think about just a little bit this morning. What's in disarray in your life? What's empty in your life? Why are you here? Why did you come to church today? Just think about that a little bit. What are you hoping to gain by being a part of community? What are you hoping to gain from the kingdom? What is it that you would like Jesus to change in your life? What is it that you would like God to restore or to redeem? Can you define it? Can you articulate it? Sometimes change doesn't happen in our lives because we're not very specific about it. We say, I really like my life to be better. Okay, that's kind of meaningless. Everybody probably would say that, right? Maybe some people say, hey, it's as good as it's ever going to get. It's amazing. I love it. Sometimes we have to communicate expectations, right? I will often have, as I'm sitting with a couple maybe who are going through a rough, bumpy spot in their marriage, well, I would just like it if, he would, love me more. I would just like it if she would pay more attention. Okay, what do you mean by that? What exactly are you looking for? What does it look like to love someone more? What's your expectation of what that looks like? Because if we can't articulate our expectations, it's really hard to know if we've arrived. And so when Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? What he's asking of blind Bartimaeus is, tell me what you really want. I need to know what you're hoping is going to change. And so that question for us, what in your life today would you like to see restored? Maybe it isn't physical healing. It's not always physical healing, right? Maybe it's a broken heart. Maybe you're just wounded from relationships in the past, and it's keeping you from really diving in. You can't embrace people. Maybe there are circumstances in your life that you'd like to see changed. Something needs to be different. You don't want to be in this place anymore. What is it? If Jesus were here and he were asking you, which, by the way, he is, what do you want me to do for you? What's your answer to that question? Maybe it's not a radical change in your life. Maybe it's a subtle change, something that you just trust that there's more out there for you. Maybe it's relationships that need to be repaired. Maybe it is physical healing. What is it that you're looking for? What is your expectation? Do you come to Christ with expectations that something's going to change? But probably some of us in the room are having some thoughts about that. Maybe we're thinking these thoughts. Well, I got myself into this mess. I'm the one who did this. I got myself into this mess. Why would Jesus need to get me out? Or maybe my life's good enough. It's fine the way it is. I'm just going to put up with it and it'll be okay. Or maybe we say things like this. Well, I don't think God works that way anymore. He doesn't heal anymore. He doesn't restore. He doesn't do that stuff anymore. That was way back in the day. But what Jesus says to us is that I've come that you may have life and that you may have abundant life. He's looking to give us an abundant life, not just getting along, but abundant life. And so what's missing from your life that's bringing about abundance? Because we know for sure that Christ came, that the Messiah came to bring light, that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And so once you've determined what you want to change, then you can live into the hope of that change. And so what is it that you're struggling with? What is it that you'd like to see changed? What is it in your life that you would like to find redemption from some bondage, or you'd like to be restored? Because hope of redemption and restoration can be realized with Christ, God with us. The wonder of God with us is that he steps into our lives to redeem and to restore. Israel was broken by their own sin, by walking away from God. She faced all sorts of challenges and bondage, but always with a promise of coming redemption and restoration. They lived in that hope, and they waited. And sometimes they waited, and sometimes they waited, and sometimes they waited again. And so there's times for waiting, and times for waiting, and it seems like it's going to go on forever. God, where are you in the midst of this? And you know, there are times when the answer to our question is no. Like there are times when God says no. There are times when healing doesn't come. I think about what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. He says, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me. This is really odd language, I think. So it was to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul says, I came 3 times to the Lord to take this thorn in the flesh away from me, to take this broken situation away from me. But God said, no, I'm going to ask you to continue to live in that circumstance. I'm going to ask you to continue to live in that situation because I want you to experience my grace in the midst of the brokenness that you're facing. Paul's belief was that God told him, you're going to walk in this way. I'm not going to get you out of your circumstance. And we know there are times when God doesn't remove us from the circumstances we want out of. There are times when God doesn't heal. There are times in his sovereignty when he doesn't give us what we want. That's not that complicated a thing when we realize that that's how relationship works. We don't always give everyone in our life everything they want. It's just not the way it works. And God doesn't always give us what we want. I've really been challenged by the book I've been reading lately, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. I shared a little bit of this with you a couple of weeks back. But you remember that what Frankl says is that the people who died in the concentration camps were the people who lost hope. They were the people who thought there was going to be a specific outcome, and it didn't happen. Or it didn't happen when they thought it would happen. Or it didn't happen the next time they thought it would happen. And finally they just gave up. And he said, you could see it in their eyes when they were done. You could tell when they were just going to die. And he tells a story of one man who felt like he'd had a message from God that God was going to release them, that he was going to get them out of this concentration camp at a certain time. And he waited and he waited and he waited. And the day came when he believed God said he was going to get them out of the concentration camp, and it didn't happen. And he said you could just see the man decided he was done. The next morning he was dead. And Frankl says sometimes we have to recognize that the purpose that we have for our lives right now is maybe to suffer. And if our purpose at the moment is suffering, then we suffer well. We trust God to hold us firm even in that suffering. So we recognize that we're not always going to be just, kind of removed from the negative circumstances. The things that we want to have changed don't always get changed. Sometimes we're meant to, for whatever reason, and I don't have the answers for all of why that is. We don't get out of our circumstances. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to ask God to move us, to change us, and to heal us, because he does that. And hope is expectant waiting. It's waiting. It's watching for God to do the work that he says he's going to do. It's watching for God to bring about this abundant life that he desires for us to have. And sometimes waiting is difficult. It's hard. In Psalm chapter 13, verse 1, how long, O Lord, will you forget us forever? How long will you hide your face from us? When are you going to show up? Because the reality that we understand about the world is that we don't always get change, that we don't always get what we want, but that Christ desires for us the abundant life that only he can give. And so when we see something that needs to be changed, we remember that the mystery and the beauty of God with us is that he comes into our lives to redeem and restore. And so I just want to ask you again, what do you want him to do for you? What is it that needs to be changed? We continue to ask God to move. We continue to hope for change to come, to be restored from our brokenness, to be redeemed from the bondage, and be brought into the abundant life that Christ intends for us. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. And there are at least two things to see in the midst of the situation that we find Jesus healing and restoring. There's always some required action. You notice that when Jesus heals, there's always a step for the people to take. There's always something that's required. And also, there's always something that's beyond that individual to accomplish. So what part did we play in our own healing? Blind Bartimaeus is calling out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus says, okay, what do you want me to do for you specifically? What does it look like for you, for me to have mercy? Restore my sight. But here's what's interesting about the story, that Bartimaeus is making this fuss, and he's calling out to Jesus, and people around Bartimaeus are saying, just, hey, quiet down, you're causing a fuss, you just need to be quiet. And Jesus says, call him. Notice this. Bartimaeus is blind. It would seem like it would be kinder for Jesus to go to him, wouldn't it? But he doesn't. Call him. And it says that they said to Bartimaeus, hey, take heart, he's calling you. And it says he threw off his cloak and he sprang up and he came to Jesus. There's this moment when Jesus says, okay, come. The man at the pool. Do you want to be healed? Well, I can't, because whenever the water gets stirred, I can't get in fast enough. Okay, well, rise up, take your pallet, and walk. There's this step that he asks the man to make. But it was the power of Christ in their lives that brought about healing. But we see these things. What do you want? And what are you going to do? What do you want? And are you willing to take whatever step I give you to take the next way forward? The power is in Christ. The healing is in Christ. But often he says, go and do this. Here's what I need from you. And so the question again is, what do you want to see changed in your life? I just was thinking about this little sort of table here. What's the problem you're facing? What do you want from Christ? What would you like to see changed in your life? Not a rhetorical question. I'm asking you to think about that. What part of your life right now, where's the abundance leaking out, and what would you like to see restored in your life? And then I think the next obvious question is, what do you have the ability to change? Sometimes there's brokenness going on in our lives. Sometimes we need restoration, and sometimes it means that we need to take a step. Like we have the ability to make a change. We have some control. So in terms of what you would like to see, what do you have control over? What can you change? And then it's asking Jesus, show me the next step and let me take the next step. Give me the power to take the next step. And then it's getting up and it's taking the next step. But then to think about what's difficult or impossible for you to change. What's going on in your life that you just can't fix. You've tried to fix it. You've worked at it and you've ground away at it and you're not making it happen. You don't have the power. Bartimaeus didn't have the power to make himself see, or he would have. Well, amen. Didn't have power to make himself walk, or he would have. What's outside of your control? What's impossible for you to change? I have to tell you, there's been times in my life, and not that long ago, actually, when I realized I was just really working hard to control all of the different aspects of my life, and it was creating a lot of anxiety and tension in me. There are things we have to recognize. This is just beyond I can't change this. Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And step number one, here's the call for you. What do you have the ability to change? What can you do? So can you articulate what you want from Christ? And then what changes can you make that you know he's calling you to make? And then what do you have to wait on or hope in him for? What's outside of your control? What can you not change? What can you not fix? And it's in that moment that we come to him and say, Lord, I need to see you. I want to hope in you. I want to wait for you to bring about change, to restore and to redeem what's broken. We remember this Advent season with wonder that rooted deep in the heart of God is a desire to redeem and to restore. Not just somewhere out there or back there in history, but in our lives and circumstances today. What are you hoping for? What do you expect? What do you want Jesus to do for you? Hope is waiting and watching to see what God will do with our answer of what do you want me to do for you. Hope is waiting and watching to see what God will do with our answer to what do you want me to do for you. And so this morning, I want to invite you to think about these questions. Number one, imagine yourself in the story of Bartimaeus. What is your answer to what do you want me to do for you? What's your actual answer to that? Maybe it's time for you to articulate that. Maybe you say, I sure don't have the abundant life I want, but I don't know exactly what I need or what I want. You got to spend some time in reflection on that. What are you hoping God will do for you? What do you want to see changed in your life? How specifically would you like to see that change? What is it that you're really looking for? And what is in your control to change in your situation? And what is outside of your control? You know, sometimes we grind away on what's outside of our control, and it's helpful just to recognize that's outside of my control. Because once you realize that a thing is outside of your control, you can let it go to the one who has more control than you. You can trust him at that point, and you can wait for him. What is the next step in what you can control? And then how can others pray and help you to hold you accountable, to help you as you go forward? Are you in a community? Are you in a group of people? Do you go to a life group? Are you in a small group where actually people can encourage you in the steps that you know God has called you to take? Sometimes we live in isolation and we know we're supposed to take some steps, and we just have to have others who say, are you taking the steps? Sometimes we need others to pray for us because our own faith isn't enough to keep us going forward. And so we surround ourselves with others who can encourage us. So what are you hoping for? What do you want to see change? Jesus is asking, what do you want me to do for you? And what are the next steps that he would call you to? And what are the things outside of your control that you need to continually lay at his feet so that he can bring about the change he wants to bring? Because what he wants for us, all of us, is abundant life. That's what he came to give us. Life, and life abundant. And that's what Israel waited for centuries, and what we remember at Advent season.